I just want to go over the project in terms of the write-up and the different components which you're expected to have in your project. Now, you all know that you've got 5 different sections in your project: the analysis, design, technical solution, testing, and evaluation. Now, in your evaluation, what you're looking to have is an overview, so just a basic introduction to say what is the project which you're embarking on, what are you trying to solve. Then a bit of background may be necessary. Not everyone will know the problem domain, the area which you're doing your project in. So you may need to put in some background so that anybody who isn't familiar is up to speed with it and will understand the rest of your project. Now, having a user interaction is really important. Without it, you can't access a huge number of marks. So that user interaction, you can do that as a survey, you can do that as interviews. You need to have your client and you need to have that user interaction in there. Now, generally you can research the existing competitors, if you like, other things which do the same or similar things. So look at those. What are the things you like? What are the things you don't like? What are you looking to emulate? What are you looking to improve? Why? And how does that all fit together? And then justify is where you're bringing everything in the analysis together and just saying, okay, because the user said this, I'm doing this objective. Because the research on the existing one said this doesn't work well, I'm going to be doing an objective saying this. And with all of this, really everything, you really need to be saying, okay, I'm therefore creating these objectives. This is what my project will need to do. And this is at very much a user level. The user should be able to look at your objectives and at the end look at your project and say, yep, that project meets that objective. Would the client know whether you're using object orientation for it? No, not necessary for the objectives. Would they know whether they can access the interface from anywhere? Yeah, they would. That would be a reasonable thing to have in the objectives somewhere. Now, make sure that your objectives are numbered so you can reference them, so you can say later on in the program, I'm doing this because objective 5B says this, and also they need to be smart, and we've discussed that before. There is a few other things which you can chuck in there, sort of current method. How is it currently being done? That's more sort of a, if you've got a real world problem which you're trying to solve, for example, a parents' evening system, how are they currently doing it? And then that will help you decide how you want to be doing it in your program. A data flow diagram is usually quite useful to show how data is currently moving around the system. Kind of works with the current method a bit. And then any diagrams which help clarify what is currently going on, or what you mean, or how the problem should be solved, can be put in there as well. Notice that all of this is just culminating in your objectives. This is the key part. Once you've got solid objectives, they will carry on throughout your program. And you use those objectives to inform the design. Now, the design can contain various things. If you've got a user interface, have a little bit on that. If you've got something which opens 100 different screens for very similar things, you don't need to do every single one. We need to know that you can design an interface. We don't need to see you just churning out 100 of them. Flowcharts for any important algorithms or how things will work on a particular aspect. You can do it on an individual, very small section. You can do it on a high level concept. I'd expect probably about 3 of those. Think about what is best in your project to go into that detail on. Don't create a flowchart which, in order to fit on an A4 piece of paper, I need a magnifying glass to actually read it. If that's the case, then you really need to be doing it a lot more either high level and not breaking it down into quite so many chunks, or not looking at the entire program, just looking at a small section of it. You can do it in multiple flowcharts if you like. Design choices. This is where you're justifying how you're doing things. I'm adding this aspect to it because the objectives say this. I'm doing this because the objectives say this. A lot of these are influenced by your objectives. Some of them will come from other parts in the analysis. So the input, process, storage, output may come more from the current method. But you're looking to take a lot of these things from the objectives, and do say in your design, I'm doing this flowchart because objective number whatever. The more you can link it back to the objectives, the better. You may need a class diagram. So if you're using classes, how are those classes linking together? So it's often a good idea just to say, okay, I've got all these different aspects of my program. Here's what they are. Here's the attributes which they have. This is what they have. Here's the methods. This is what they'll do. How do they link together, if at all? And then what are you storing, either long-term in storage or short-term in memory? So are you storing a graph? Are you saving some user data? Is there stuff which you'll then need to save and reload? How are you storing all of those things? And how are they what you want? How does that link to the objectives? Is the objective saying you must be able to save the game state? Probably worth pointing that out when you're doing the data storage on it. This is how I'm going to save games. I'm doing this because objective 12 says this. And then a data dictionary. This is similar to the data storage. It's like, okay, what sort of things? Mainly it's going to be more of your variables. Don't go too low level with this. We're not interested in that you're including I as a counter in a for loop. What we want to know is the higher level ones. Do you have an array called students, which holds all the students in your database? Do you have an array called paths, which shows all the paths of the different things? Things like that. So if you were explaining your algorithm to someone else or explaining your program, which ones would be really important? And on that, it's good to say what it's used for, if there's any validation, what is some example data, and what data types you're looking for. So you've got the objectives, which are carrying on throughout the project, and the design section, which is going on to the next bit. So after you've done your design, you've kind of got your technical solution. And you'll notice the objectives is still coming through, underlining everything. Your design section is coming into this, and that's influencing your code. Make sure you have comments. Function descriptors are good, so either in your code or separately have, okay, this is a function, takes this as an input, this is an output, it does this. Nice and succinct. Now this key algorithms is where you can show off and say, give me the marks. Because we want to see you using techniques, complex techniques. We want to see you doing really funky code. We also want things which are linked to the objectives. If you can say, due to objective 5a, I needed to do this bit of processing, therefore I made this algorithm, which you can see on page whatever of the code, then that's really good. You don't need to be copying out code. You can just point to it, have an explainer on what the code you're describing is, why it's important, and how you did it. And then when someone's marking it, they can look at this section without going through all the code and trying to find something mark-worthy. They can just look at the key algorithms and say, yep, that's really cool, that's really cool, that's really cool. Yep, they need full marks. This should only be a couple of sides of A4. I'm not expecting this to be too huge. It's more just saying, okay, look at this bit, look at that bit. They're cool. You can see I've done graph traversal on here. You can see I've done recursion here. Things like that. And you're just highlighting the skills which will get you into the top mark bands. Once you've made your program, the design section doesn't have so much of an impact in the next sections. Your code, obviously, we're going to be using that in the next things, and the objectives are still very important. So the testing section is essentially a test plan. You'll take your objectives and you'll make your test plan based on your objectives. I need to test that this works because of this objective. If your objectives are complete enough, then that will be most of your testing. However, you do also need to be having some sensible tests in there for validation and anything which needs to be tested but isn't necessarily an objective. It's not a bad idea to have the testing also as part of the code, as part of the coding process. So when you're doing a module, you can put in some testing saying, okay, after I wrote the student module, I ran these tests on it. This shows me that my testing module is good and I can carry on with the next bit. Put that into the testing section and that will really help. If anything doesn't pass the test, that is an awesome opportunity to then go back and say, okay, this didn't pass, I've then changed this, and this now passes. This is the test. Then you've got your evaluation. Again, your evaluation is taking your objectives. Go through each individual one. Has your program met the objectives? Get some user feedback. Again, really important. You're limiting yourself on marks if you don't go back to a user and say, hey, I've done it. What do you think? If you're sort of doing a Reddit survey for your initial user interaction, maybe put your program on the web somewhere or ask for some volunteers and say, hey, can you run my program and see what you think? So your user feedback, the objectives, and the program should all go into your evaluation. What went well? What didn't? Did you hit all your objectives? Why? Is this going to be useful for your end client? Did it set out what you originally intended? What hurdles did you face along the way? How did you get around them? Did you want to do something different, but you found there were technical limitations? Did you find that the client wanted something different? Did you find something else worked easier? Did you find some things, yeah, I wanted to do this, but it's beyond A-level standard? And then have some improvements. So what would you do if you had another year to do the project? Or if you had a year to do the project and started again? Because quite frankly, if you're getting to the end of this project and you're not thinking, you know what, I want to start this again from scratch because I'm now a much better coder, if you're not thinking that, then you probably haven't done an ambitious enough project. It is a growing process. It is a process, not an end result, in terms of this coursework should really help you grow as a programmer and become a better developer for that. Okay, so make sure you include all the elements which are on this. Best of luck.